Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at the Westerlands. Last week we looked at House Lannister. Before that, we had a look at one other house in the Westerlands. But today we're doing, and Andrew K in the chat spotted you called it, this is the and all the rest of it video for the Westlands. All those other houses, there are many fascinating, interesting houses in the Westlands that we don't actually get huge amounts of information on in the main story because they're always slightly off camera, as it were. We haven't really been to the Westlands in the main story of A Song of Ice and Fire. We just have people thinking about it, remembering it, stuff happening off screen. So this is what we're doing today is they're looking at, pardon me, at the Westlands as a whole. I've got a whole load of questions I will get to, but I will start, as I always try to, with a bit of an overview for you. Now, I thought what I might do this time, first of all, let's see whether we can get the map up. Here we go. So this is quartermaster.info. Please do go and check them out. And I find it a really good map, very interactive map to be using. Now, when we're talking about the Westlands here, this is a sort of the left side of this map. In the middle of the map is the Riverlands. You can see the Isle of Faces, the God's Eye Lake over there on the right. The Westerlands are that part on the left, the mountain range which you see going down there, and then the lands off to the west of it, sort of squashed between that and the sea. So that's what we've got. Geographically, it's quite similar, actually, to a few of the other kind of fringe areas, regions in Westeros. If you remember when we were looking at the Vale, that too was hemmed in by mountains with just some quite lush areas in the middle, if you managed to get in that far. Dawn, similarly, when we get there, hemmed in by mountains. The north, again, not hemmed in by mountains, but quite cut off from the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. So what we have here is not a situation like the Riverlands where everybody's passing through it to be going to somewhere else. There's always going to be wars fought over it because it just happens to be in the middle. Here we have another naturally defendable kind of region. It's not the same extreme as we get with the Vale, where there really is just one mountain pass through that you can use. Here, there's quite a few that cut through the mountains. You can see, in particular, there you've got what is the River Road, which sort of heads up towards River Run. That goes through places like the Golden Tooth, which is a fortress there guarding a pass. We've got another, if you head further south, the Gold Road, which connects Casterly Rock, Lannisport, all the way across to King's Landing. And there are several more passes which head through the mountain ranges as well. So it's not as impenetrable as the Vale, but still quite easily defended. Now, what I thought I would do just to sort of start off this time is just give you the opening couple of paragraphs or so of the description we have of the Westerlands in the world of Ice and Fire. So this is the official description of it and early history, if you like. The Westerlands, it says, are a place of rugged hills and rolling plains, of misty dales and craggy shorelines, a place of blue lakes and sparkling rivers and fertile fields, of broadleaf forests that teem with game of every sort, where half-hidden doors in the sides of wooded hills open into labyrinthine caves that wend their way through darkness to reveal unimaginable wonders and vast treasures deep beneath the earth. These are rich lands, temperate and fruitful, shielded by high hills to the east and south and the endless blue waters of the Sunset Sea to the west. Once the children of the forest made their homes in the woods, whilst giants dwelt amongst the hills, where their bones can still occasionally be found. But then the first men came with fire and bronze axes to cut down the forests, plough the fields, and drive roads through the hill country where the giants made their abodes. Soon the first men's farms and villages spread across the west from Salt to stone, protected by stout Motte and Bailey forts, and later by great stone castles, until the giants were no more, and the children of the forest vanished into the deep woods, the hollow hills, and the far north. So that's what we have as an overview and an introduction here. And I think that we'll talk a lot about the mines, the gold, the silver mines that we have in the Westerlands, the mountains. This is something a lot of us understand and appreciate about the Westerlands. But one thing I whenever I read this section here, it always reminds me is that the Westerlands is not different to anywhere else. We often think this is unconnected to um, the Children of the Forest or any of that kind of old magic. No, absolutely not. The Children of the Forest were here. Giants were here. Giants lived in those mountains, and the first men wiped them away. And there is still evidence of that existence. If you look, as I say, even now it says that there are hidden doors into subterranean caverns. It's riddled by caves. It's underground. This is true for across Westeros, but particularly here in the Westlands, is that there is an underground world every bit as much as there's an overground world. The children of the forest lived in their hollow hills, and there were many of them here. So, even though, as we'll get onto in just one second, even though there aren't really very many First Men families still in the Westlands compared to quite a lot of the Riverlands, even, and the Vale, and obviously particularly the North, there are still evidences of the children of the forest here, dotted throughout the Westlands. So the first men came in, and they built farmsteads, they chopped down forests, they made castles, they killed the children of the forest, drove them into deep forests, or simply out of the region completely. The giants, you can still apparently sometimes find giant bones in the hard to reach parts of the hills and mountains. They were all destroyed, and the first men set up these petty kingdoms dotted across the Westlands. Now, the situation here is not dissimilar to what you find in many other parts of Westeros. We've heard that similar story in other places. These houses grew up, they became lords of their own area, of their own land, and eventually some of them started styling themselves as king. The greatest among these were the Casterlys at Casterly Rock. Now, we looked a bit about that, obviously, last week. House Casterly were supplanted by the new House Lannister, and we get the legends of this through of Lan the Clever. The Lannisters became the kings of the Rock, and they lived in Casterly Rock, inside the rock. The image that I have sort of behind me here is from the TV show, which sort of shows a castle on top of a hill. That's not really how George R. R. Martin describes Casterly. Casterly Rock, yes, there are a few fortifications on the top of the rock, but most of the structure, the building, is inside the rock. Caverns, chambers, and it's not like living in a mine. This is beautiful. They have light beaming in at angles from the outside. They have mirrors, clever use of mirrors, and a huge hallway filled with all the gold ornamentation. This is bright. This is airy, and it's not at all dingy. Deep down below at the very bottom, yes, there are mines and the like there. And this kind of model of actually having your castle inside the mountain, inside the hill, is not uncommon. There's quite a few houses. So Castamere being the classic example. Again, we've talked about that, where House Rain were. They had a very similar idea. We also get the Crag, again, quite similar there. Again, that's where House Westling are. So we get these petty kings set up across the Westerlands, and then um, uh, slowly but surely the Lannisters start to extend their influence and their presence. What you'll find is that the first Lannister king who really comes to prominence is Lorien the First, and he um, has Casterly Rock and Lannisport, this burgeoning town or city, port city, just next door. They head up the coast. They expand their empire up the coast to Castamere, the Crag, and Banefort. So if you're sort of looking on the map there, just along that western coast of Westeros. Um, we're not told how much further inland they go. That seems to be that their empire at the time, their kingdom at the time, was this sort of strip of land along the western coast of Westeros. Why did they capture those parts? Well, partly I think they were looking to protect themselves. The biggest you could, it's just off the sort of top left of this map. You can just see Pike there. The Iron Islands are just off the coast, the northwest there of the Westlands. And the Iron Islanders, House Greyjoy, and the Iron Islanders, they have a long history of raiding the Westerlands. This was the fertile, pardon me, fertile, easy ground for them to be coming in. They wouldn't, most of the time, they weren't there to be building their own empire. They were literally raiding. They were taking things, they were killing the men, taking the women. And eventually maybe selling some of them back. But this was the reaving way for the Iron Islanders. And the Lannisters, although they were largely protected in Casterly Rock, um, it will have done them a lot of good to expand out their kingdom. So you have places like Banefort here, which could actually act as a buffer between Casterly Rock and the Iron Islands. Similarly, a bit later, we get a little bit more of expansion out. You see Fair Isle there, that island just off the west. That's House Farman. We'll talk about them in a little bit. They have a long history of fighting against the Iron Islanders. And again, the Lannisters expanded out their kingdom, brought them in as well. What's interesting is that they never really, it would appear, try to expand out beyond these very clear and strong borders of the mountain range and down into the south. There are some strong, if we went south of here, you'd start heading into the Reach, and there are some strong houses like the Gardeners and the High Towers. So perhaps they just didn't want to be facing such strong opponents, but they seem, although we think of Lannisters as being very clearly seeking after power, the Lannisters for centuries, millennia even, seemed relatively content where they were. They expanded out the borders of their kingdom a little bit, but they broadly stayed where they were. And the heart of this was gold and silver and precious metals, because the whole area, the whole region is riddled with seams of gold and silver, and this was the basis for the Lannister riches. And the Lannisters did eventually become the richest family in all of Westeros. There are other families. There was House Velaryon for a little while. In fact, at the start of the Dance of the Dragons, House Velaryon was the richest family after Corlys Velaryon's travels. The Hightowers had huge riches as well, but the gold of Casterly Rock made the Lannisters hugely rich, and it became famous, incidentally, all the way as far as Asshai. Legends of Lannister gold have made their way all the way as far as Asshai. So where people ask questions by this point, it's almost legendary. So do the Lannisters sleep in beds of gold and walk around in palaces all of gold. That's the kind of the feeling that you get when you get a long way away. But this idea of Lannister gold has spread out across the entire planet. And it wasn't just a matter of the Lannisters just hoarding gold and they sort of spend it every now and then. They created an economy around this. So Lannisport is a city, a port city that has got a thriving merchant class within it. It's sort of run, the city itself is run by a cadet branch of the Lannisters of Lannisport. But it's very clear that this is partly how the Lannisters become rich, not just by hoarding gold, but by artisans making golden artifacts. These can be sold to traders as ships come around the south of Westeros and up the west coast. They can be getting Lannister gold. This is, I've said before, but this is the last stop, really. If you're a trading vessel who wants to go to the main ports in Westeros, you work your way around the south coast. There's Gulltown and King's Landing, and you can move your way through. Maybe you stop off at somewhere like Planky Town. Then Old Town is absolutely central. Maybe to the Arbor to pick up some wine. But the last stop at the end of this is Lannisport. You could go further north if you wanted to, but then things start just getting a whole lot colder and grimmer, and frankly you're heading towards the Iron Islanders, and that brings a whole new load of risks as well. So if you're a trading vessel, this is where you end up. This is the last port of your call. You empty everything out and you're buying these golden treasures, and then you take them back out as you head over eastwards, back over to Essos. So that is the source of the Lannister wealth, but it's also the source of the wealth of other families here. We don't talk about it huge amounts, but the other families in the Westerlands are also rich. They also have got gold mines. They're literally sitting on gold mines, many of them. Now, the Lannisters sit at the top of that tree, so they are the richest, but other families also have great riches. Now, the broad history when we start moving forward is that when the Andals invade, the Andal invasion was not just in one go. This was over hundreds of years, boat by boat, as kind of like an armored long-term immigration rather than anything else. And the Andals arrived, and by the time they reached the west of Westeros, the Westlanders, they've seen how this goes. They've seen what happened in the Vale. They've seen that over in the Vale there was this whole series of battles, but eventually they just couldn't stop the tide of Andals coming in, and they just had to accept the first men there had to accept the Andals coming in and becoming the dominant culture. By the time you get into the Riverlands, there are still some isolated fights. Some hold out, some noble families hold out against them, but the Andals sort of sweep across the land. By the time we get to the Westerlands, the noble families have clearly decided, well, there's no stopping this. And so they intermarry with the Andals as the Andals come across. And so by the time we reach A Song of Ice and Fire, and Targaryen reign even before that, the majority of the people of the Westerlands are Andal or mixed race, effectively. There are a couple probably of old First Men families still hanging around, but for the most part, this is now an Andal culture, but not holding up Andal culture as being like the great thing as they do in the Vale or down in the Reach. It's part of it, but they're not pretending that this is the heartbeat of Andal culture. There's a lot of houses that we will go through quite a few of these houses during the course of this stream, that we don't get a huge amount of history on, it has to be said, because we don't get huge amounts of, I mean, the story is not based in the Westerlands. We'll probably get more of the politics of it when, say, Cersei or someone heads to the Westerlands. George R. R. Martin has said that we will go to Casterly Rock in the last two books, presumably in The Winds of Winter. And but it's very clear that there are, as there are in other parts of Westeros, there are some very strong, noble families. So, for example, House Farman on Fair Isle, they are a very old, Dawn Age kind of family. They've been settled there on Fair Isle for a very long time. House Rain was an incredibly powerful house in exactly where I was up to when we took the break, but there are a number of powerful houses there, second tier houses down below the Lannisters, and this is why when we get to that famous time when we get to the House Tarbeck and House Rain, who both rebelled against the Lannisters. They felt strong enough to be able to do that. They felt that they could just ignore their liege lord. And not just, to be clear here, not just ignore their liege lord, but also be ignoring the or flout Targaryen rule itself, because the Lannisters were there as lords paramount, placed there by the king, by the Iron Throne. So that's the strength we have. House Crakehall very strong, House Farman very strong, House Rain were definitely strong. House Westerling we'll talk about in a little bit, also very old and storied. So there are some very strong families we've got going on. I think with that, let's have a quick look at the chat. I think I had a couple of questions come through in the chat. Let's see whether I can find. This is where I need my little house elf to be helping me out here. So we've got. If you bear with me for just one moment, I will find the questions that I missed. Okay, so White Man saying, good evening, Maester Robert. Greetings from the Isle of Anglesey. Oh, well, just greetings back to you. Anglesey is a fine, fine part of the world with one of my favourite castles in the world, actually, Beaumaris Castle. Wonderful. I'm a bit of a castle nerd. Beautiful moat, curtain wall, concentric walls. Keep it's a model of how a sort of a castle of that age, a Western European castle of that age, should look like. Sadly, they didn't manage to finish it, but yeah, a beautiful castle. Weirwood Net didn't see a question attached to that one. But thank you very much. And Auntie Slayer saying, hi, Robert. The Westerlands are intriguing, yet we've hardly seen them in the books compared to the other regions. Whose POV will we see them from? Well, this is a really interesting one. I personally think, and I mapped this out a bit last time, what we're likely to see is the answer to your question is Cersei, but how we're going to get there is Cersei is currently ruling King's Landing. When I say currently ruling, she is the regent. Kevin Lannister has come back and basically taken control from her. She's only just sort of returned from being imprisoned by the High Sparrow. But Kevin Lannister's been killed by Varys, and Varys has planted some clues there that will definitely make Cersei think that this was the Tyrells who did this. Cersei will take this out on the Tyrells. Whether it's exactly the same way that we saw it happen on the TV show, when she's basically blowing up the Great Sept, or whether it's a different way, I do not know. But certainly all the indications are that she is just going to be causing chaos in King's Landing. And the echoes are there from the Dance of the Dragons. The people will start to turn against her as well. They're going to have a good alternative appearing, coming through as well when we've got Aegon the Sixth, currently at Storm's End, just 2 weeks' march away from King's Landing. He is surely going to be moving on King's Landing, and she will eventually have to leave. And where does she go? The only place she can go is back to Casterly Rock. And assuming we stay in her POV, we will see her go to the Westerlands and go to Casterly Rock. And then she'll be licking her wounds. What does she do next? How does she regain control? How does she get revenge on the enemies who she's now going to be convinced they're everywhere? And to be honest, she's probably right. They are everywhere. But that will be, I think, how we will see the Westlands and Casterly Rock. It's through Cersei's eyes as she escapes King's Landing and goes to try and find a safe place. Okay, so let's see whether we can get some of my questions from my patrons up. Here's hoping they didn't all get lost when this went down. No, we seem to have them here. Excellent news. Okay, so Ranabir Mitra, let's start with a question from you, saying, salutations, Robert and Dan the dog. Hope you're well, especially after our mighty Reds became FA Cup champions. Yes, very much so. Not a football stream, but I was very happy. Forgive me for again asking for your thoughts on this tinfoil, but my question here is about House Banefort. If you open quartermaster.info and see the map, you'll notice that the Banefort and Castle Pike are like two castles which were almost supposed to be on the same road to one another, except now they are separated by a body of water. What do you think of my tinfoil? That it is the Hammer of the Waters which caused the Iron Man's Bay to break into the Iron Islands, and that the Banefort was the original fortification piece against the Iron Islanders. And then you also say Morgan Banefort, a famous household, is known to have thralls and practice necromancy. Seems awfully Ironbornish to me, almost as if they share cultures. Yes, so for those who are unaware of the Hammer of the Waters idea, what we know is, or what we're told in the world of Ice and Fire, the legends of the early days when the first men came into Westeros, and then the Children of the Forest did this huge magic spell, basically, which sundered Westeros from Essos. That's why we have the dotted lots and lots of tiny islands which connect Dawn with Essos, with the disputed lands. They're known as the Stepstones, but the legend has it that that used to be an entire land bridge, but got destroyed by this magic spell, which basically washed them away. But reports of this, legends of this, are conflicting. And so we have another sort of report, a couple of different reports of how and where they did this spell. Perhaps it even happened twice. And one of them, we're told they did it in the neck. And the neck is obviously very watery. And then when you look across to the Iron Islands, this kind of archipelago in the Iron Islands, it does have that same kind of feel as the Stepstones, just being off the coast, small islands, all connected, all very close to each other and close to the mainland. So theory is maybe the second Hammer of the Waters wasn't just to disconnect mainland Westeros from mainland Essos. The second Hammer of the Waters was not as big a success, an attempt to sunder the north from the south of Westeros. It led to the neck being largely submerged, and it led to the Iron Islands becoming an island archipelago. I don't hate this at all. I think it's a really interesting idea. We can call it tinfoil because we don't have much actual evidence for this. I agree that there are lots of hints that the Iron Islanders were first men, and there's some language issues there that's definitely seem to suggest that um, maybe there were weirwood trees there at some point. Our working assumption with weirwood trees is they have to be connected to the weirwood network, and so if you sunder the islands from the mainland, then perhaps those trees would die. Perhaps that's what Old Wick is. We'll come to there in a few weeks' time. But these, what Naga's bones, they think the bones of a sea dragon, but they're tall, they're white, they're stone-like. They seem quite similar to what we're told dead weirwood trees are like. So, speculation. I'm all right with it as an idea. So, but the idea, so Banefort being there on sort of the northwest end of the Westerlands, is very close to Pike. They would be very close if there wasn't that bit of sea there. Might there have been a road? Possibly. I don't think we can say for sure one way or another. Moon saying, "Hi Robert, I started wondering about this after watching back last week's live stream. Did the Lannisters have a song before the Reigns of Castamere? And where did their saying a Lannister always pays his debts come from?" Well, so did they have a song beforehand? No. I mean, it's not like they're um, sort of national anthem or anything like that. This is connected to them, and everybody knows about this. For those who don't know the background, the Bane, sorry, the when House Rain rebelled against the Lannisters, the and Tywin dealt with them brutally. A song was written called by commission from the Lannisters, The Reigns of Castamere, basically describing what happened. And this then became a kind of a tool used, kind of psychological warfare threat used by the Lannisters, particularly Tywin Lannister, when the House Farman was starting to get a little bit rebellious. He just sent a musician, a bard, over to them and played the Reigns of Castamere, and they got the message: do not mess with House Lannister. And so when we come to the Red Wedding, what we see there, and the song "The Reigns of Castamere" appears, this is completely out of this is why Cat is starting to get on edge. There is no place for that song at a wedding between House Tully and House Frey. That is a threat from the Lannisters. So there wasn't a song before there. They didn't have like a particular anthem or anything like that. In terms of the other half of your question, Lannister always pays his debts. Is also, again, it's not their official house words. Their official house words are "Hear me roar," but everybody associates this saying a Lannister always pays his debts. Now, where does that come from? Well, I think this clearly works on a number of different levels. Firstly, it's a kind of a showing off thing. We always pay our debts because we've got cash. We're rich. We can always pay any debts. That's not a problem. And that was then good for them. And it, as a sort of a tool of diplomacy, it allowed them to do a lot of things. You see Tyrion, incidentally, do this quite a lot. He can use the good name of the Lannisters as credit. So when we get towards the end of Dance with Dragons, he is there buying his freedom, basically, by writing out checks against the Bank of Lannister, basically. And almost no one else would have been able to get away with that. The only reason why he could was because they know that he's a Lannister, and a Lannister always pays their debts, because a Lannister always can pay their debts. Everyone, as I say, the legends of Lannister gold have stretched all the way over to the far ends of Essos as well. But there's obviously an extra layer to this as well. It's not just a we're good in business, you can trust us, we're good for the money. The hint here is that we will pay people what they're due, like House Rain. They can be destroyed because we always pay our debts. So it's an unofficial set of house words, but it's better for them, and than just this "hear me roars" a little bit. It doesn't really sum up the spirit of House Lannister. Right, let's have a quick flick through the chat. Lady Pushkin's come into the chat. Good to see you. Saying you're at a caravan park with poor Wi-Fi. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you're having a nice time. And James Border saying, I wonder from time to time, what is the general amount of weirwoods that need to be connected together to survive? Or is it they have to be plugged into the Isle of Faces in some way? Well, we don't know. We don't know the details of this. But yeah, the working assumption we have is that for a weirwood to survive, it has to be plugged into the network as a whole. So it has to be connected in. The Isle of Faces has got lots of weirwood trees, and so we kind of think of that as being like the heart of the network. So a weirwood tree could probably theoretically survive anywhere as long as it could be connected in. Now, if it cannot be connected in, it will shrivel and die. What happens if you get rid of the Isle of Faces? I don't know, and nobody really knows. But the working assumption is as long as there is a good enough number of weirwood trees, then we're still okay. Okay, let's go to a question from Commander Ray. With the deaths of all the competent Lannisters who are still loyal, it's likely Cersei has to flee back to the Rock. This was the idea that I was setting out a little bit earlier. How do you see the politics playing out, with perhaps the best chance in the century for the other families to be able to get out of the shadow of House Lannister, whose cruelty seems a recipe for rebellion? Furthermore, what impact might that have on the story and on Cersei and the rest of House Lannister? And which families might emerge, or will the reigns of Castamere play again? And Maura Lee similarly asking, what will the importance of the lesser known houses in the last two books? So I think the first thing is we'll learn about what's going on, because we have to be honest and say we don't at the moment know. The Lannisters have been building armies, calling their banners pretty much non-stop through the books so far. And the other thing which has happened is that the Westerlands got attacked, and a lot of damage was caused to it. Robb led his army riot through a lot of the northern part of the Westerlands. They got as far as very close to Casterly Rock. They were considering going to Casterly Rock. The crag is that they just took the crag, home of House Westerling, when Robb got his injury. These are really important and central parts of the Westlands, and so the people in the Westlands, that smaller houses in the Westlands, suddenly, and remember there are a lot of very strong old houses there, suddenly will be starting to think maybe the Lannisters going through one of their weaker phases. Tywin Lannister, who's this strong central figure for so long, is dead. Tyrion has disappeared. Kevin Lannister also dying. They seemed, yes, they took over in King's Landing, but they seemed unable to prevent the Westerlands from being attacked. And indeed, Tywin kept his army at Harrenhal for a very long time because he was protecting King's Landing rather than the Westerlands. So you could certainly understand that some of the Westerlands noble families might start thinking, this isn't what we signed up for. The Lannisters can't protect us anymore. On the west coast, Euron, the Ironborn, are raiding once more. It's entirely possible that there could be some disgruntlement, a mini rebellion. Who knows? Particularly if, and this is speculation, but particularly if Cersei looks around and decides that the only ally that she can get is Euron. Would the Westerlands, who have been all of their life, they've been fighting the Ironborn, now to have the Ironborn ruling them, there's more than enough here for if George R. R. Martin wished to create a subplot of Westerlands lords starting to turn against the Lannisters, that would make complete sense. And the feel will be, I suspect, if this happens, it will be quite similar to when Sansa goes with Littlefinger to the Vale. Before that, we'd had some hints about what was going on in the Vale. We knew a few of the houses, but we didn't really know the politics until we get in there. Littlefinger launches his coup, and the Lords Declarant come and rise up in a sort of it's not really a rebellion, it's quite polite in many ways, but they try to take power back from Littlefinger. That's the kind of feel I think we may have when we get to the Westerlands. George R. R. Martin, if he's taking us to the Westerlands as he promises, it's not just going to be Cersei sitting in Casterly Rock just thinking to herself about stuff. She will be demanding the noble houses in the Westerlands all come to her aid, support her, and we will get to see the various different noble lords and ladies there and how they might react to her. So, yes, it's definitely very possible. The question in the chat from Kirsty Angel saying that the rock is based on the Rock of Gibraltar and is one of the Hercules pillars. He smashed the mountain in two in 12 labors. Could the rock be connected to another? Could have been connected to another land before. That's quite interesting. So yes, the George R. Martin has said one of the inspirations for Casterly Rock is the Rock of Gibraltar. For those who don't know, Gibraltar is this massive rock just on the southern tip of Spain. I'm not going to get into all of the politics of that. Currently a British territory disputed by Spain, but the Pillars of Hercules are these two. There is a similar rock on the sort of outcrop just south, which form a sort of a channel through which you have to pass in order to get to the Mediterranean Sea. So hugely strategically important. Yes, we get this mirror for the Rock of Gibraltar there. So if Casterly Rock is based on the Rock of Gibraltar, does this mean that there's another sort of an echo of it somewhere else? I don't think necessarily. I don't think George R. R. Martin can take inspiration without from a thing without following through and doing it exactly how it is. So he took inspiration from Hadrian's Wall to create the wall, but that doesn't mean that everything you get on Hadrian's Wall is what you've got on the wall, for example. So the big difference is that Casterly Rock is massive. It's to call it a rock is probably the wrong way of saying it. This is 3 times the height of the wall. Just to give you some kind of context. And so all of inside of that has got all of these chambers and layers inside that. This is a city within basically a standalone mountain. Andrew Biederman saying, hello, Robert. Hi there. Why are the other Westerlands houses loyal to the Lannisters in Tywin's time? I understand fearing and respecting them due to cruelty, but it seems that some seem to go the extra mile. Lady Westerling wouldn't have had to be feeding moon tea to Jane. The Hound doesn't care about his house and easily could have left to serve another nicer lord who would have kept him further away from his brother too. I mean, it's an interesting question. Why do the houses in the Westerlands kind of fall into line, as it were, behind the Lannisters? If they are strong, is it just out of fear? No, I don't think it's just out of fear. Although, to take those 2 examples you used, we looked at House Clegane a couple of weeks ago. The moment that the Mountain became Lord, the Hound left the family home. He went to take service with Tywin Lannister and the Lannisters. Why did he do that? I think in this particular instance, this is because he left because there is, I mean, a fear of his brother is perhaps just one element of what was going on there. But what he knew was that the Mountain was not going to go against Tywin Lannister. So if there was one person in the entire world who could offer the Hound protection against his older brother, it was Tywin Lannister. And so that is why the Hound went to serve Tywin direct, rather than go anywhere else. He knew he wasn't. He owed his fealty to the Lannisters anyway, so this made logical sense. He may well have managed to find service for some other lord in the Riverlands or something, but he would always be viewed with a little bit of suspicion, and he wouldn't have that kind of protection. As for the Westlings, why? I mean, I think I've got some questions on this a bit later, so I'm not going to get all of the detail here. But for those who kind of maybe show-only people, there's a whole extra layer of plot going on with Robb Stark's wife. Now, on the show, it was Talisa. She came from Essos, so she was outside of all of the politics of Westeros. Here in the book, however, she is a daughter of House Westerling, one of the oldest and most reputable houses in the Westerlands. And Robb gets injured in attacking her home castle, basically, and she helps to nurse him back to health. They sleep together. Robb feels on the bound to marry her, and that then leads to a position where because a lot of his bannermen then, the Freys, for example, head off. Some of the closest people now in his army are actually people from the Westerlands, people from House Westerling, which made for quite an odd dynamic. Now, the extra layer that's going on there is that her mother, Sybil Spicer, she was a Spicer originally, it seems was working for Tywin Lannister. As I say, we'll get through all of the detail of that in a little bit, but she was feeding her daughter moon tea, thereby preventing Robb Stark to be getting an heir because his wife could not have children. So, why on earth would she be supporting the Lannisters? Well, a number of reasons, but it's very clear that Tywin was working very hard behind the scenes, and it's very noticeable that her brother gets rewarded with Castamere, the long abandoned castle, hugely rich, still great veins of gold underneath it. Suddenly, the family are lords, basically, of a very. It's a bit of a doer-upper. They'll need to put a lot of work into it, but potentially in the long run, this elevates them up to a much, much higher social standing. Chaos Ballerina. Did any of House Broom survive the dance? Did they become House Broom, or was it a cadet branch? Or was one as his broom without an E, or was one a cadet branch of the other? Which castle do either brooms live in? I may have to pass on that one. I will, rather than give you some half thoughts, I always want to give you a full answer on this one, and I do not know the specifics here of House Broom and House Broom. So rather than waffle about it, I will come back and I will answer that one next week if that's okay. And Martin S. Hi there, Martin, saying, I went to Gibraltar 2 months ago. Large rock indeed. Indeed. But bad weather. But it was bad weather when I was there. They have their own version of the UK pound sterling, but they drive on the right, unlike left side driving UK. Yeah, absolutely. It's. I mean, I've not been there myself, but I know plenty of people who have, and it's a fascinating place. Let's go to Stephen. Saying, hi, Robert and Dan the dog, who has gone to bed. I have a question about the first Blackfire Rebellion. It seems that most of the nobles who joined the rebellion were from lower order houses, whether their motives were ambition, chivalrous idealism, or a particular grievance. Were there any houses from the Westlands that joined in the rebellion, or were the Lannisters firmly in control at the time? Well, we don't actually have a full list for the first Blackfire Rebellion of who's on which side. We just have to pick it up from bits of information we have in the World of Ice and Fire, and also in the Dunk and Egg stories. Particularly when you get to the Swan Sword, a lot of that is talking about the Blackfire Rebellion. A lot of the backstory for that book is about the Blackfire Rebellion. And what it's very clear from that is that this wasn't a matter of it being easy to say, well, that region was on this side, that region was on the other side, or even that house was on this side and that house was on the other side. This was a very complex situation where houses next to each other would pick different sides. Both felt that they were in the right, a bit like the Dance of the Dragons that we know a whole lot more about. But rather than there being this kind of very clear, you're supporting the Greens or the Blacks, people, individuals from some houses joined to support the rebellion. And we do not know whether that means that the house as a whole supported the rebellion or just some individuals. Some clever houses hedged their bets by sending some individuals from their side off to support the rebellion, but kept the house itself technically on the main supporting Deeran's side of the argument. So that whoever won, they could claim to have sort of supported them. But a lot of these houses we simply do not know all the details. We do know that House Rain, there was a member of House Rain who joined the rebellion. House Tarbeck, similarly, they kind of swapped sides partway through. We don't know any more than that about the other houses in the Westerlands. Question from Catherine Furseth saying, "Hi Robert, could you please talk about House Farman, their history, their most important interesting characters? They seem to be one of those houses that has a rich and interesting history popping up throughout the story in important places and around important people. Alyssa Farman, to name just one. Their house is ancient, going back to the Dawn Age. Do we see any traces of that in their culture? If this house has one central quality, what would it be, and how do we see this play out? Is it their longing for the sea?" Yes, it is their longing for the sea. That's the main quality that they have. We tend to sort of think about there being three big fleets in Westeros. We get the Royal Fleet, we get the Red Wine Fleet, and then we get the Iron Fleet. But there are quite particularly along the west coast, most of the houses there have got a significant fleet of their own. House Farman, as an island house, it's very sea based, and so they have got a large fleet of their own, and that is very broadly their main the main thing to just sort of distinguish them from the rest of the Westerlands. The other is their hatred of the Iron Islanders. They considered themselves, and other people considered them, as the main defenders against the Reavers, against the Iron Islanders on the west coast. They, being the closest island to the Iron Islands, then this was what they saw their duty and role in life, as to be protecting not just themselves, but also the west of the Westlands. As for interesting characters, it's noticeable that the amount of information we have about Fair Isle and House Farman is relatively limited until we got in Fire and Blood a lot of information suddenly connected to Rhaena Targaryen. Now, I'll join this up with a question from Mr. Worldwide saying, "I feel particularly bad for Andrew Farman. Do you think Queen Rhaena? Why do you think Queen Rhaena married him in the first place? I know she said he was kind, but I find it hard to believe a queen to two prior kings would rush a wedding to a second son because he was simply kind." Okay, so let's unpack. This is quite early in Targaryen history, but it's quite a significant moment. Rhaena was married to Aegon, who was the firstborn son of Aenys. So Rhaena was the granddaughter of Aegon the Conqueror, and she was married to her brother, who was the heir to the Iron Throne. After Aegon, we have his son Aenys. After Aenys died, then the heir apparent was Aegon, who would have styled himself Aegon II, but was remembered in history as Aegon the Uncrowned, because he got stuck out in the Westerlands when his father died, and that's the point at which Maegor returned. Visenya went to get him, and basically Maegor claimed the crown for himself. Now, Aegon, Rhaena's husband, was killed by Maegor. They had a dragon fight. Maegor was an Balerion the Black Dread. Very one-sided. Aegon died. Maegor, a little bit later, you'll remember that he eventually married 6 women. One of those was Rhaena. And so Rhaena was one of these black brides that he had later on when he was desperate to have children himself, and he just tried to get right. I want women that I know can have babies. And one of those women was Rhaena, because she had twin daughters. Now, so Rhaena was married to Aegon the Uncrowned, then married against her will to Maegor the Cruel. After all this, Jaehaerys takes the throne. After Maegor dies, Jaehaerys takes the throne. Rhaena has had a pretty horrible time. It has to be said. The person that she was married to is uh, is dead. The person she then got forcibly married to somebody else who is now dead. The other person, the second person she got forcibly married to, was the person who killed her first husband. This was pretty horrific for her. Her children, who you could probably make quite a good case that her eldest daughter should probably have had been next in line. Maegor actually named her eldest daughter his heir, but Jaehaerys took over anyway. So her child then got passed over for the Iron Throne. She decides to take herself away from politics. You can understand it. And she ends up at Fair Isle. And when she's at Fair Isle, she decides against, without consulting the new king, she decides to marry this guy called Andro Farman. Now, Andro Farman, he wasn't the Lord. He wasn't even next in line to it, but he was a member of House Farman. Now, he seems to have been, certainly at that point, he seems to have been a nice enough person. When asked why, she said that he was kind. Now, are we to believe that that is why she decided to very swiftly marry this third husband? And I think we're given two answers here, really, by George R. R. Martin. I mean, this whole thing is given to us by Fire and Blood, so we're not given a full POV. We're not told exactly what was going through her mind. I think the idea that if she were to choose somebody to be married to, if she did wish to be married, that she would choose a kind person after what she went through. I think that, to me, that makes complete psychological sense. But the clear implication is that actually the person that she was in love with was Elissa Farman. And so this was just a front of a marriage, an excuse for her to be there, to be close at all times with Elissa Farman. And sure enough, when the Lord Farman died, his son took over. His son actually hated the fact that Rhaena was basing herself here on Fair Isle, with her dragon, the center of absolutely everything. He was supposed to be lord of this place, but actually it turns out you've got this almost legendary Targaryen figure there with a dragon. Nobody's really deferring to you. They're all deferring to the Targaryen, who's becoming known as the Queen in the West. He basically chucks them out, and Elissa Farman goes with them. So the clear implication here is that Rhaena was in love with Elissa, but Andrew was just this kind of front for it, which he seems to go along with. Things take a darker turn a bit later with him, but Elissa does eventually grow tired of it. They all move over to Dragonstone, and she says that she just wants to go off sailing. This is the farmer we were talking a moment ago earlier. What is it? The distinguishing characteristic of the farmers? It's their love of sailing. And she's the person who wants to know what's west. And so she sails off. She steals some dragon eggs. She sells the dragon eggs, gets the money to buy herself a magnificent ship, and then sails that off to the west? What is west of Westeros? So that's the Alyssa Farman story, and that is why it would appear that Rhaena married Andrew Farman. Let's go to a question from Lord Medici, saying, 7 blessings, Robert. 7 blessings to you too, sir. My question does concern the Lannisters, but not as a family, but in terms of the rulership status of the Westerlands as a whole. The Lord of Casterly Rock is also Lord Paramount of the Westerlands, and also traditionally the Warden of the West. As I understand it, Lords Paramount are rulers over a kingdom. A warden is a military position given to the individual responsible to repel attacks for a specific direction, north, south, east, and west. However, does this mean that in times of war, a warden can command houses outside their kingdom? For example, if there were an attack from the west, could the Lord Paramount of the Westerlands command houses Florent, Manister, Ricewell, whatever? Because they are Warden of the West. As an example, would House Manister be bound to answer the call of House Tully, who are their liege lords, or House Lannister, who are the Wardens of the West? So, I mean, this is a matter of sort of technicality as much as anything else. You're very right in the way you describe how these different things work. The being a Lord Paramount is you're the head of the feudal pyramid in your region. It's basically who used to be king of that region, they get to be Lord Paramount of that region. Now, along with that, there is another layer of title which you can have, which is being warden. Now, there are wardens for the north, south, east, and west, and these traditionally are held by 4 particular houses. In the north, for example, the Lord Paramount of the north is also the Warden of the North. This, in this case, is the Lord Paramount of the Westlands, is also the Warden of the West. Now, that title does indeed mean, yes, you, on behalf of the crown, for this is a Targaryen or post-Targaryen position, on behalf of the crown, you would be leading the defense of the realm for an attack from that side. That's the idea. So, not that there is much to the west other than perhaps the Iron Islanders, but the Warden of the West would be in charge. Now, the Iron Throne would be in charge of deciding who, that they could say to the Lannisters, you need to go off and help there, and the person who's heading up this army basically is going to be Lord Lannister. So that is, it's not giving them sort of temporary control over any house there. It's just saying there's going to be an army or a navy there set up to defend Westeros, defend the Seven Kingdoms. The person who's the head of that army is the warden. Now, incidentally, there are other smaller warden posts. There's Warden of the White Knife, I think it is. There's the Warden of the Prince's Pass down in Dawn. So there are a variety of these sort of like warden titles which can operate at a lower level. But yeah, it's a distinct role. Most of the time, it's an honorific. If there's not a war, it's just an honorific you give to someone. Ned Stark does at one point. He does think to himself when Jaime gets given the title Warden of the East because Robert Arryn is very young. It goes to him. Then he does think, "Oh, hang on, that's a bit much power for the Lannisters to be Wardens of the West and the East." But for the most part, the title would mean nothing unless there actually was a war. Let's go to Raven's Oath saying, "Good evening, Robert. Hope the beard game is still growing." No, the beard, beard's gone, as you can tell. I moved house recently. My shaver was in the last box I looked in, so that's why I had a couple of weeks worth of extra long beard going on. But yeah, it's now a little bit more trimmed. My question is about Sumner Crakehall and what happened to him. Jamie seems proud of having squired for him and was a great knight, but I do not believe it's stated what happened to him. Was he killed by the Kingswood Brotherhood? What else do we know about him? Okay, so yeah, Jamie was a squire when he was young. He was a squire for Sumner Crakehall. Particular, he went off with Sumner Crakehall to fight the Kingswood Brotherhood, which was basically an outlaw band in the Kingswood, which is the wood just south of King's Landing, or between King's Landing and the Storm's End. And it's there that Jamie distinguishes himself and he gets knighted by Arthur Dane. Jamie thinks back a few times to when he was squire, and he seems to think back in a kind of a positive way. This was actually psychologically for Jamie. You have to remember that this period of his life before he becomes a member of the Kingsguard and before he obviously becomes the Kingslayer, this is the simple, carefree part of his life, and he often looks back on it quite warmly. Now, in particular, when we're talking here about Sumner Crakehall, the Crakehalls are one of the top tier houses in the Westerlands. They're just based just south of Casterly Rock. They're great hunters, and Sumner Crakehall appears to have been, he was quite a big man. He was a good knight, and it seems that he taught Jamie well. But Jamie does think of him 2 or 3 times as being quite old. So the implication is that although he didn't seem to die in the Kingswood Brotherhood battles, that probably was his last action per se. Certainly by the time of A Song of Ice and Fire, his son seems to be the Lord Crakehall. So we're kind of left with the working assumption that he must have just died of old age, which does sometimes happen in George R. R. Martin's world. I know that most people seem to die in battle or suspicious circumstances, but sometimes older people just die. So if he was old-ish when Jamie was his squire, then you're looking at a good 15 or more years through to the beginning of Song of Ice and Fire, and during that time, there's every chance he just died. Let's go to Maura Lee asking about the lesser houses in the dance. Were they all for Team Green like House Lannister? Yes, they were actually pretty much. We haven't heard. Maybe we'll find out some more. Maybe George R. R. Martin will drop a little bit of extra lore for us when in House of the Dragon he did with season 1. He sort of dropped a few extra little bits around the side, but as far as we can tell, the Westerlands just all fell in behind House Lannister and all went to war for Team Green. Diego Godoy saying, Hola Robert, what do you think will happen to Jane Westerling in the rest of the main story? If or when she reappears, will she be considered a traitor by Cersei, or will Jane want to follow the rest of her family and support the Lannisters? Okay, so I will refer people to the video I did a week or 2 ago about the prologue to the Winds of Winter as the starting point here. George R. R. Martin has said specifically, and I always spoil my own videos, so feel free if you want more details to go to the video, but what I say there is George R. R. Martin has said that the prologue to the Winds of Winter will include Jane Westerling. Now, when you start going through, and this is what I'm saying in this video, is when you start working out what does that mean, therefore, what does that mean for the action with Jane Westerling? It quite quickly becomes apparent that this means that we're almost certainly going to be seeing her being transported from the Riverlands to the Westerlands. Where we leave off that story is that Jaime captures Riverrun, and that means that he captures, among other people, Jane Westerling, because that is where when Rob went up to the Red Wedding, he left Jane there at Riverrun, being protected by the Blackfish, who has managed to escape Riverrun, but Jane Westerling is still there. So he has got her, and then decides what he's going to do is send her off to the west, to Casterly Rock. He realizes that there is no greater danger from in terms of sort of like rallying support for the North than if it gets discovered or thought that Robb Stark might have a child and an heir. So first of all, he double checks. At this point, this is about 6 months after she had last seen Robb. She doesn't look pregnant, but he asks whether she's pregnant, and her mother, this is the point at which her mother says, no, I made sure she was drinking moon tea, so she's not. And Jaime says, okay, well, we're going to be doubly sure. Armed guard, you're going to go to Casterly Rock, you're going to be basically locked in a room, no contact with anyone else, for 2 years, because after 2.5 years, then even if you then become pregnant, nobody will be able to claim that was Robb Stark's. So, and leave a huge gap, a big enough gap for it to be laughable, the very idea. So he puts her in this kind of like armed escort heading west with her mother and also Edmure Tully, another political prisoner is sending over to Casterly Rock. And he's a bit concerned, is Jaime, that this is clearly going to be a prime target for somebody to try and attack that group before they get to the safety of the Westerlands. So he initially has 100 soldiers there guarding it, then he doubles it, and then he doubles it again. So we've got 400 Lannister soldiers who are in this group heading west. And that's where we leave it. He sees them off, and he leaves instructions with the head of that squad, that group of soldiers, and basically says, if that looks like she's trying to escape or Edmure's trying to escape, shoot them. Don't muck around. We don't want them out there. That's a huge risk if they get rescued. It's better that they get shot. So that's where it's been left. Jaime is concerned about an attack from the Blackfish, who escaped from Riverrun. Jaime had also freed the garrison. So the Tully garrison that were there, also he took their weapons and armor off of them, but they're trained soldiers, and they headed out, and they're somewhere in the Riverlands now. The Blackfish is somewhere in the Riverlands now, clearly knowing the local territory in a way that Jaime doesn't. So, what's going to happen? Well, this has been set up, I think, for us to be expecting there to be an attack on this armed escort. Whether it is from the Blackfish, personally, I won't go into all of my thinking here, but I think at some point, George R. Martin has made it very clear, at some point, the super pack of wolves that is led by Nymeria, Arya's direwolf, will have a big part to play. My instinct is that they have already been attacking Freys and Lannisters. This isn't just random wolves just doing stuff. This is targeted. This is almost quite magical. So I think we may well see, as the prologue to the Winds of Winter, we know it's going to have Jane Westerling, and I think the wolves will come in. and they will attack. Now, will she die? I don't know. I think that's the kind of thing that George R. R. Martin could easily take either way. The key plot line that we've got going on here that this is going to play into, though, is the Stark succession crisis, because the whole reason that Robb wrote a will was because he did not have children, and we will get basically this when this happens. We will know for sure. Maybe she will die, or maybe this is like in a month's time when it's going to be pretty obvious whether she is pregnant or not. If she does not have, if there are no children there, then Robb's last will and testament suddenly becomes hugely important. And what does that say? That says Jon Snow is my heir. So that will then cause the Stark succession crisis, because depending on when that arrives at the Wall, Jon Snow may himself be dead. But then what happens even when he comes back from the dead, from people's perspective? So there's lots of layers going on here, but this, I think, is setting up. The point of a prologue is not just, oh, here's a cool scene. The point of the prologue is to set up a lot of the themes that we're going to be seeing running through the book. And that will set up a lot of themes. It will set up the Stark succession crisis. It will set up Arya returning back to Westeros, because this is Nymeria. And Arya may well see this in her dreams. It will set up the Riverlands turning against the Lannisters and the Freys, and depending on who else is there, perhaps also Lady Stoneheart and where she's going to be heading. So there's a lot of different plot lines which could well be coming from this. Because Bay saying, when did the stream start? The stream started about an hour and a half ago. But you can head back. There was a little bit of a mix up. My laptop shut down part way into it, and then it came back up again. So if there's a big black bit in the middle, I will try and edit that a bit later. But moderators, now is the time for me to thank you, because you do an amazing job keeping the chat going, and happy when computer technical glitches happen, like me just disappearing. You kept the chat going, so thank you very much for that, and also for the links and the friendliness, and the creating such a wonderful community. So if you are in the chat, could you show a little bit of love towards the moderators? I also want to, as I always do, thank my patrons. Thank you. I can't do this without your support, and that's why I try and prioritize questions from you. But let's go to a question from James Boris, saying, from what I gather, people associate you with H plus A equals M and J. That's Howland and Ashara equals Mira and Jojen theory. Do you have any other yet unproven theories that you subscribe to? I mean, I have to admit, I don't know what people most associate me with. I think people, my general feeling that Bloodraven's behind when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. I think people probably associate me with that. The other one that I mean, I don't know whether it's like a theory that we haven't got proof on yet. My general take is on that Howland and Ashara. I think we've got enough proof now. I think not to say for certain, but to say that that looks very likely. I'm not going to get into all of that. I'll cover that some other time, I'm sure. The other thing that I would probably say, in terms of sort of a big working hypothesis I have, is the role of the Winterfell crypts, which my general take, and I did a whole load of videos about this a long time ago. I'll go back to them, I think, and update them. But the statues, I think that the statues themselves will come to life. That perhaps called by the Horn of Winter. These are the kinds of things that if you just say them like that, then it sounds like, oh, but that's just making up random things. That for me, when you actually start digging through the evidence, that's I think there's a lot. I defy you to find a single time when characters are in the Winterfell crypts and the statues are not described in ways that make them feel alive. They're described as looking. They're described as judging. They're described as moving. There's the statues are anthropomorphized, if that's the right word for this particular. Just talking about statues of humans, I don't know, but they are made to feel like they are alive. And username redacted. What happened to the actual lions of the Westerlands? And do we have any records of Lannister lords owning one as a pet? It seems appropriately flashy. Yeah, we do, and they do still have lions. There are lions in Casterly Rock, so they are there. Probably the most well. There's a couple of mentions of lions in connection with the Lannisters, which are noteworthy. One of them is we talked about the founding of House Clegane a couple of weeks ago, and that came from a lioness attacking Titus Lannister and being saved by the kennel master, basically, who was a Clegane, and that they were made he was promoted into a lordship, basically. So that's one, and that is, you can see this is the lions turning against the Lannisters. So the other time we talked about the Bane fort and how the Lannisters took it a long time ago. Now I'm stretching my memory here for the exact legend, but the lord of the Bane fort at the time, he resisted, and he basically was going to, as he was being killed, he said, because there's lots of magical and dark necromantic kind of feels to that house, was that I will, you know, you may well kill me, but I will come back and I'll take my revenge on you, on House Lannister. And in order to show that they're not scared, the Lannisters fed the body, cut up the body of this lord who had made the threat, cut it into parts and fed it to their lions. However, a tragic accident many years later, those same lions then turned on Lord Lannister. Is this the justice from beyond the grave? Who knows? Is it just a legend? Quite possibly. But yes, they do still keep lions at Casterly Rock. Andrew K saying, if it was an original theory of yours, Hardhome disaster as Valyria looking for Braavos was quite good. I don't think I was the first person to suggest that. I mean, what you'll find is a lot of these theories that are out there, they start 20 years ago or more, when you can find somebody suggesting something on a Reddit post or something like that. And over time with these theories, they get added to, and somebody else comes in, spots something new over here, somebody else adds something over there, and they sort of build and grow. And so what I try and do, particularly on these live streams, is try and present as many of these different ideas as possible, which it's not, I tend not to try and ascribe theories to myself. That's not where I will present things to you, but I'm not, and I sometimes I try and describe it as I I try to have working hypotheses rather than theories, which sounds like a really kind of subtle nuance, but I think it's quite an important one, which is that I don't sit here saying, like, this is my theory about what's going to happen, and then as and when we get the winds of winter, it'll either happen or not happen, and then either I'm going to be great or I'm going to be terrible. That's not how I operate. What I'm trying to do is say, on the basis of the information we have right now, this seems to be where this is heading. If it turns out that's not where it's heading because we get a whole new book with a whole new load of information, I will happily change my view, my working hypothesis, and I will happily present that to you. So when I change my mind on things, I will very happily tell you if I've changed my mind on stuff. Um, one example there actually is that we're going off on a tangent, but one example there is the idea of Aegon the Conqueror invading Westeros because he'd had a vision. I didn't think we had enough evidence for that, and now George R. R. Martin has basically told us that that is the case. So from now on, that's our working hypothesis, and we will go forward with that. Let's go to Andrew K saying, I agree, the theories mostly become a communal process to expand and build on. And even more importantly, I think, than that, I would agree with you, Andrew, even more importantly, that this is all George R. R. Martin's world. We're just playing in it. So these are his things. He's the person who's invented everything. So if we come up with ideas, then they're based on his stuff. So all the credit ultimately goes up to him, I think. Right. That was a very long digression, but Diego Godoy was asking about Jane Westerling, which I largely answered. But in terms of would she then support the Lannisters, I think no, she is not going to support them. If she survives the prologue, which she might do, George R. Martin did clarify that she's not necessarily going to be the POV character, and even if she were the POV character, normally POV characters in prologues, in George R. Martin prologues, die. He might change that this time. So even if she survives, all the indications are that she is now loyal to her now dead husband, and feels incredibly betrayed by her mother, who is a Lannister loyalist in this context, at least. So, whereas the other Westerlands lords seem to, for the little bits of evidence, hints we get here and there, they seem to view her as one of their own still. I don't think she will be sort of coming in on fighting on the side of the Lannisters. Lord Medici saying many of the houses in Westeros, but in the Westerlands in particular, are headed by a knighted individual, i.e. someone with the title of Sir, Sir Harris Swift, Sir Gregor Clegane, etc. These are lords of their keep and lands, but use the title Sir. Could you please clarify hierarchically what is the difference between Sir and Lord? The obvious answer is that Sirs are knights and Lords are not, but is that all to it? Well, it's ish. So if you're a Sir, that means you have been knighted by another knight. You have the theory, at least. You have proven your martial abilities. You are good enough quality to be considered a knight, and also you uphold knightly virtues again, in theory. So this is very much a rank that you get given, an honorific that you get given for your martial prowess. Now, what that means is that there's a lot of lords out there who they just didn't go in for that kind of thing, so aren't knights. But most people who have sort of most men, lordly men, in places like the Westerlands, if they are fighter type people, they will probably, by the time they're, in their late teens or something, they will have been made a knight by someone. So That's what that is. Being a lord means that you are part of the landed gentry. You have lands. You may have a keep. You may have a castle. You will have potentially vassals. Um, you can be both a knight and a lord. And it's often the case that you grow up. So, like Jamie, for example, he was knighted at a relatively young age. Um, at, and the thinking was that he would at some point inherit Casterly Rock, at which point he would be both a lord and a knight. But more often than not, by that point, the higher social title is lord, and so you just tend to be called Lord Lannister. That's I hope that's clear enough. But that's the difference between the kind of the martial rank of showing that you're a good fighter, among other things, to be a knight. The being a lord shows that you are part of the landed gentry, and you have lands and monies coming to you theoretically from those lands, which can be quite small. So Lord Littlefinger, for example, is the lord of a tower and a handful of buildings. He's still a lord. His lands are very small, but he also can be a lord with much, much larger lands. Um, Andrew Roberts saying, I'm interested to hear the history of different houses. House Rain, House Farman. Tasta also asking about House Rain. Um, I think, I think I covered both of them off already. Right? So, what I will add on House Rain is that they were one of these original houses, which were kings in their own right. And they married into the Lannisters as well. And so if you go back through the Lannister family history, you'll find lots of Rains who married in with the Lannisters. So the twist that we don't often think about with House Rain, the Rains of Castamere, Tywin wiped them out completely. This was sort of like a bit of extended family. They're a little bit further, it's not like his cousins, but you can just go back two or three generations and there are Rains there. So this is actually a house which was quite close to the Lannisters. It's not just some um, like with the House Bolton always there, uh, sort of against the Starks, and they rarely kind of intermarry. This was the Rains and the Lannisters were very, very close. Corvus Corax saying, Hi, Robert. Thank you so much for this little community. It's nice to have your live streams to look forward to. Well, I'm delighted. This makes me very happy. Speculative question. What do you see the Westerlands doing during Dany's eventual invasion? Supporting House Lannister, the Crown, or generically team not foreign invasion? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Okay, so for this, we have to cast our mind forward quite a lot. So this does start to get quite speculative quite quickly. If we work on, I think it's a reasonable assumption that Cersei will start the Winds of Winter effectively ruling over King's Landing, ruling poorly, and having to escape back to Casterly Rock. That probably is most of her arc for the Winds of Winter. We may see her reclaim her place in Casterly Rock. We may see her reach out to Euron to strike an alliance. Pardon me, an alliance there. But that very broadly is her arc, as far as we can tell, for the Winds of Winter. Now, what we're sort of expecting in terms of Dany's invasion is that Dany, let's not forget, she's currently out in the middle of the Dothraki Sea with a dragon, and the Dothraki are just coming to her. So her arc for the Winds of Winter is dealing with the Dothraki situation, getting back to Meereen, pulling her new army and everything together, gathering a navy perhaps, and then sailing over to Westeros. So we are not expecting that. Will take a long time. We are not expecting Dany's invasion to take place really until the very end or of the Winds of Winter or the beginning of Dream of Spring. Her arc, it would seem, would end with, do you remember that? I can't even remember which season it was of Game of Thrones, where finally we have the invasion fleet and Dany there with the invasion fleet. That is roughly where we'd expect, all things being equal, the Winds of Winter to be ending, or her journey within the Winds of Winter to be ending. So the reaction of the Westerlands to Dany's invasion is, it's a long way into the future. First, we do not know what's going on with Cersei. We do know that, or we think it's probably likely that Dany's invasion will hit an immediate snag, complication, with the fact that whereas on the TV show she arrived and there was Cersei in King's Landing, here she's going to arrive with somebody claiming to be a Targaryen sat on the Iron Throne. And so we're going to have a huge amount of debate between them about, okay, so are you who you say you are? Maybe he will want to try and claim a dragon to prove his claim. Then there'll be the question of, well, if you're who you claim to be, that makes him Rhaegar's son. And if he's Rhaegar's son, then you'd go, okay, theoretically, then the line of succession goes from Aerys to Rhaegar to his son. But Dany is the Mad King's daughter. And if Rhaegar had been taken out of the line of succession, which apparently Viserys had been made heir, is she then next in line after Viserys, which means that she's ahead of Aegon. It starts to get really quite nerdy and technical at that point. So there's going to be a whole load of issues going on there. So it will probably not initially feel like this overwhelming invasion. And if it does, it'll be over on the East Coast, not over on the West Coast where the Westerlands are, where Cersei is most likely to be. So what will their reaction be? Well, probably to start with, let's just ignore it. Hope it goes away. The rumors of the dragons, though, will spread very quickly, and there will be many people remembering what happened the last time dragons came over to the Westlands. So, as I say, the problem with all of that is that this is so far into the future. We've got a whole massive book to get through before we reach that moment. And a lot of because George R. Martin is a Gardner writer, a lot of different things could go in slightly different directions. Euron is trying to capture a dragon. If he succeeds, then we might have a dragon over on the west coast, and and two on the east coast, and that completely changes the dynamic that we're dealing with. The Westlands may then just be, well, we want to hide in our castles, in our crags. It was noticeable that George R. R. Martin did say Casterly Rock is probably the most impenetrable castle in all of the Seven Kingdoms. And Visenya was actually a little bit confused. Why are the Lannisters coming out to us? They could just hide in Casterly Rock, and probably Dragonfire wouldn't get them. So a lot of the people in the Westlands might think that the best way forward is just to sit there and hide. Okay, let's go to a question from 444, saying, "Hi, Robert. Returning to the Lannisters for a moment and the Valonqar issue. I can agree that Jaime fits the best, but unless I missed something, two possibilities weren't discussed last week. First of all, if Cersei is Aerys' daughter, then if Aegon is not fake, he can be a Valonqar. Secondly, if Valonqar means not just little brother, but little sibling, then Daenerys fits even better, as she can be both Valonqar and the queen, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down and take all that you hold dear." Yeah, so both possibilities are real. The issue that we have is that we don't actually see this. We just have this from memory, from Cersei's memory of what happened. So these kind of speculations about who or what the Valonqar is are very dependent on the accuracy of, if we're getting into nerdy details about specific words, how good Cersei's memory is of that moment. And she has not proven to be the most reliable POV character. So that's a small health warning we have to start with. The Valonqar will wrap his hands, is the way that she remembers it, which seems to imply male. Also, strangulation is not really how you'd imagine that Dany would be killing Cersei, if that's the way it would be. She's more of a Dracarys kind of woman. So my instinct is that it doesn't feel like Dany. Aegon, possibly. My instinct, though, is with Fagon, that he, and for those who don't know, when I say Fagon, I'm referring to the character called Young Griff, who claims to be Aegon. A lot of us think that probably he's not. Probably he's actually secretly a Blackfire. Whether he knows this or not is a different matter. But that would make him a fake Aegon or Fagon. So that's where we get Fagon. Would he therefore be confirmed as the younger brother or younger sibling and be the Valonqar? My instinct is that George R. R. Martin is never going to 100% tell us. I think he will heavily hint, but never 100% tell us whether this actually is the real Aegon. I think we're supposed to reach the point where we're thinking, does it matter? I think Aegon will turn out to be not a paragon of virtue, but seemingly quite a popular and competent leader. Varys has had him trained up, taught all of the things that a good ruler should learn, and he seems to be quite a decent guy as far as we can tell. So I think we're supposed to be starting to ask ourselves, does it matter if this person is who they claim to be? Because they actually seem to be doing a good job of ruling. Let's go to a question from Martin S, saying, "Hello, Robert. I would like to ask about the gold in the Westerlands. A lot of the Lannister wealth was down to mining that. Was the gold on the lands of House Lannister or on the lands of Lannister bannerman houses, or both? What would happen if gold was found on Lannister bannerman houses' lands? Would the bannerman house get to keep the earnings? Would they have to pay a tax, as it were, to House Lannister? Was there some kind of gold mining earning tax to the Iron Throne from House Lannister or Lannister bannerman houses? Was the Westerlands the richest kingdom out of the 7 in Westeros?" So, a lot of really interesting questions there. We don't know the details of the Westerlands tax system, but this was based on a kind of a feudal model in which the money flows upwards, and House Lannister are at the top of that tree, and so all the money does flow up to them. They definitely get port fees from Lannisport, and they can charge them a bit higher because people are coming. They want to come there because of all the gold stuff. The short answer, I think, for if you find gold, if you're one of the smaller houses and you find gold, can you mine it? And the answer seems to be yes. The mines, there appear to be mines for the different houses, and not just House Lannister mines, which are underneath some house's castle. They are mines that those houses have. Now, whether we call it a tax or something else, a certain proportion of that will be filtering up the feudal system to the Lannisters at the top. What is quite interesting, though, we talked a little bit last week about the question of whether or not this House Lannister's gold might have run out, or it might run out in the future, because on the TV show it did. And this was made into quite a big thing. Then nothing really came of it, but it was definitely the money has run out. Now, there's no hint of that in the books. However, there are some houses, House Westerling is an example, that have fallen on hard times, which you'd think would be pretty impossible if you're literally sitting on a gold mine. And the implication is that there are some gold mines that they've just worked their way through a whole seam and now it's gone. That doesn't seem to be the case with the Lannisters, but for the Westerlings, yes. And so they were a bit poor, and married. There are many layers to this, but what's one of the reasons why they married what seems to have been a rich merchant family from Essos, the Spicers, and because they just needed the cash because they were starting to run out. So hopefully that sort of clarifies the situation. The gold is mined by the family who own that bit of land. However, they pay, in whichever way it works out, they pay dues up in the system, in the same way as having a mill operates. I mean, we're shown this in various places. Mills are quite common. The mill has a tax. Basically, it's a tax. It's worth something to the lord of that land. The farmer, the miller, gets his bags of flour out of it, and then either passes some flour up the feudal ladder to the lord, or when he sells his flour, some of the money he gets from that goes up to the lord. So, in the same way that you, if you have a windmill or a mill on your land, that money heads up. That's the same with gold mines, but one would assume quite a lot more money. Cast Ballerina. The Strongbow seems obsessed with fighting some of Westeros's most famous fighters in single combat, especially the Hound. Will he get his wish and die in battle, or will he be lured to captivity by the Brotherhood without banners? Interesting question. I mean, I think probably there are too many, and this is Crake Halls, the Boars. There's too many battles going on in um, the Riverlands for somebody looking for a fight not to get into one, and probably eventually you would die from it. So that would be my instinct. The Brotherhood without banners are not at this stage. They're not really about the captivity thing. They're more about the killing thing. So the Brotherhood without banners have been basically taken over by Lady Stoneheart, and Thoros of Myr, who's hanging around, he's really quite. He talks to Brienne about it, and he's really quite downbeat about it. We used to stand for certain things, but now the Brotherhood without banners, they find somebody from the frays of the Lannisters and they will kill them. They will get whatever information out of them they can, and then they'll kill them. So it's hanging them. You'll remember again from the Merrick Fray, when we get the big reveal of Lady Stoneheart as an epilogue to Storm of Swords. That's just them killing Freys. The Brotherhood without banners killing Freys. So they're not really there to be luring into captivity anymore. Brandy 1842. There seems to be quite a bit of magic surrounding houses Westerling and Farman. What is the source of magic in the Westerlands? They don't seem to have connection to skin changers or blood magic. King of Imps also asking about House Spicer, a newer house in the Westlands. Do we know what their origins are? Are they Westerosi merchants or foreigners who settled there? Certainly their ancestor Maggie the Frog would suggest a foreign origin. Yes, so this is a link that I think quite a few people haven't made because it's not emphasized very much, but it's definitely a link which George R. R. Martin has put in there. House Westerling, I've already said they were down on their luck. Not too much money. They could no longer be sort of like trying to get the best marriages, and they end up marrying with the Spicer family. Now, the Spicer family come from Essos, we're told, and this is where Sybil Westerling, Sybil Spicer, comes from. And she is the granddaughter. So they've been married now 3 generations. She is the granddaughter of Maggie the Frog. Maggie the Frog, who gave those prophecy, or that prophecy, to Cersei. So there is this, I mean, this seems to be sort of blood magic. That's where that seems to come from. But also, we're told that there's love potions, there's just sort of more sort of hedge wizardy kind of magic going on there. So that adds in this extra element to what could be, when we're talking the Jane Westerling, Robb Stark thing going on. It opens up the possibility that actually it isn't just Robb Stark just doing what he thinks is the honourable thing. What if there was some kind of love potion going on? Maybe Robb couldn't help it. Maybe there'd been some spell cast on him as part of Tywin operating behind the scenes, pulling strings. Maybe actually the marriage to the Westlings wasn't just a happenstance, a thing which happened to happen, and the Lannisters could make best use of it. What if this was actually planned from even earlier on? I'm not saying that is the case, but it opens up the possibility, because we've suddenly injected a little bit of magic into what's going on there. Reflective rambling, picking up a question for Auntie Slayer May. Thank you. I love it when people pick up questions for other people. Thank you. Reflective rambling. The Crown got all those loans during Robert's reign by leveraging Lannister gold. Why is there less urgency retrieving the debt? Because the Lannisters are now effectively the Crown. That's the short answer on it. The reason why Tywin was happy to have the Iron Throne indebted to the Lannisters was that it increased the power and leverage of the Lannisters at that time. But the moment, so Robert Baratheon, the Crown were literally in the Lannisters' debt. Now, why were they not then calling in their debts later. Well, once Joffrey was on the throne and Tommen was on the throne and Cersei was Queen Regent and Kevin was Hand of the King, I mean, they were basically, by extension, they were the royal family, and so they were now just owing money to themselves. So they could theoretically they could sort of write off that debt if they wanted to, but that's why is that there's now no particular need. Martin S. saying, so if money flows upward in the system, does a share of mined gold go to the Targaryens or whoever sits on the Iron Throne too? Also, can someone who is not nobility at all become a knight? So, to answer the second one, can someone who is not nobility at all become a knight? Yes. So, this is how Dunk becomes a knight or claims to become a knight. I still hold that he wasn't actually knighted by Sir Arlen, but he never claims to come from some kind of great landed background. He doesn't know his parentage at all, really. He grew up in the slums of Flea Bottom, but his master, Sir Arlen, he says, knighted him. And that's okay. People look down on him for it. He's just a hedge knight. He's not from any great family, but nobody disputes the fact that he is a knight. So yeah, that's the short answer there. You do not need to be of a certain. In practice, the vast majority of the time, the people who are knighted are from that sort of higher rank. At least in part because they're the ones who get squired and they're around other knights. A knight has to be the person who does the knighting. So you have to be in contact with knights. It's in the best interest of knights as a whole not to spread this too widely. If everybody was called a knight, then you being a sir means very little. So they did try and keep it a closed shop. And also, being a knight was quite expensive work. You had to have your armor, you had to have a horse. You normally would have to sustain having a squire or squires. If you were there wanting to do tourneys, then you probably need a couple of different horses and your lances. And if you lost, there's a fair chance that you would lose your armor and have to buy new armor. So this was actually quite an expensive business. So mostly the people who were knights did come from the sort of the landed gentry, but you didn't have to. The first half of the question, though, if money flows upwards in the system, does a share of mined gold go to the Targaryens or whoever sits on the Iron Throne? Yes. Again, we're not told the specifics here, but it may not necessarily be as straightforward as that. So the Iron Throne, as in the money flow, does head upwards. It always heads upwards, but it's not necessarily just you give 10% to this person, they put 10% up to the next person, they put 10. It's not quite that straight a line. There's quite a complex set of things that the Iron Throne, the Crown, seems to have as direct sources of income. King's Landing and the Crown Lands seems to come direct to the Iron Throne. They also seem to have some impact on port fees. So they can decide about port fees, which seems to imply that some of that port fee money heads up to the Iron Throne. Now, the port fees for the Lannisters, that will be a lot of money, because you might be able to charge extra money if you're like bringing in expense or taking out expensive goods and things like that. So yes, the money flows upwards, and yes, the implication is that the houses at the top do sort of pass money up to the very top, but it's not just like everything gravitating upwards. A question from Maura Lee. Hi, Maura. Actually, just saying, just a show of love and support for all the great content. Love you. You're the best. Thank you very much. I hugely appreciate it. And let's go to another question from. We've done that one. Oh, actually, I've only got about 3 more questions actually here from my patrons. So now is a good time if you'd like to drop any more questions into the chat. I'll try and get to as many of them as I possibly can. Phelan Walker saying, I would like to hear about House Payne. What kind of history do they have, especially considering their morality? There's such a contrast between Podrick and Illyn, which makes me wonder which of them is more representative of their house in general. Well, we don't know huge amounts about House Payne, it has to be said. So the Illyn, Sir Illyn Payne, he's the headsman. He's the guy who chopped off Ned Stark's head. What we know about him, the reason why he can't speak is that his tongue was cut out. He was there as basically a right-hand man to Tywin Lannister when Tywin was Hand of the King to Aerys the Mad King, and he was caught saying something along the lines of, well, Tywin really rules the land, doesn't he? He's the person who's Hand of the King and he makes all of the important decisions. This got to the Mad King, who chopped his tongue off. So that's why he has no tongue, and he was brought back by Robert Baratheon as a sort of a nod of thanks, really, to the Lannisters. The Lannisters, don't forget, they sat out most of the war, but they did have a decisive impact right at the very end. And as much as Tywin Lannister was very keen to be showing Robert Baratheon quite how loyal he was, promise, by killing the Targaryen children and showing him. Also, Robert Baratheon had to, the Lannisters were rich and powerful. He had to make sure that the Lannisters were on side. So he had to be putting out olive branches. The biggest thing there, obviously, was marrying Cersei, but there were other things as well. One of those things was, and we can bring Illyn Payne back. We do not know the relationship between familiar relationship between Illyn Payne and Podrick Payne. They are remote cousins, is basically what we're told, from the same house. And Pod, he actually has quite a sad upbringing. So his father died in the Greyjoy Rebellion. And then his mother ran off with a singer, basically leaving him abandoned. He got taken on by another part of the wider family, and then he ended up in King's Landing, where he gets basically given to Tyrion to be his squire. So they are very different, but that's because of their very different upbringings. We don't get a feel really for House Payne as a house. We're not even really told who the important members of the house are. So it's the hints we get are that it's probably not a great house. Abandoning children. Illyn Payne, he seems incredibly loyal, but he doesn't seem a particularly nice piece of work. Question, Chaos Ballerina picking up. Thank you very much. Picking up a question for Sir Breton Briarwhite. Can you please do a video about House Brax? They have a unicorn as their sigil, but the only unicorns we know exist on Skagos. Could they be from the north originally? And Reflective Rambling actually picking up the same thing here. saying House Brax has a unicorn as a crest. The only unicorns we know are on Scaros. Could they be from the north? So yeah, I will happily look into this. This is another one of those small houses. I suspect the answer is that we don't know, and George R. Martin hasn't told us. But I will pick up on this, and in the next live stream, I will answer this one. Charis Ballerina saying House Swift was a full noble house during the dance, but are now just a knightly order. Why? How does one lose their lordship without losing their seat? Well, you can get demoted. So although you do being a lord means, as a general principle, you are lord of a place. The being a lord is also an honorific and a grade, and you do not need, therefore, to have a place. So Varys is Lord Varys because it was felt that you had to be sort of lord rank to be on the small council. So you do not need to have a bit of land attached to you in order to stay a lord. But if you do not, then you're having to live the life of a lord without any of the income streams that come from it. Auntie Slayer saying, we've acknowledged the Lannisters have fewer prominent secondary houses than most liege lords. Will any become more prominent in the remaining story? So, I mean, I think House Westling are quite prominent and will remain quite prominent. As for the rest, I mean, I don't know. I mean, my instinct is House Farman might do if we get the Iron Islanders and Euron starting to take more of an interest over in the Westerlands. That may well be an issue. The Crake Halls, I think, probably, if you had to pick a big house, they're one of the larger ones. But George R. Martin hasn't sort of pushed any of these to the forefront. And I don't think we're going to find out until we get Cersei in the same, as I said before, in the same way as we didn't find out all of the detail about what was going on in the Vale until we actually start getting the POV chapters over there through Sansa. We're not going to find out all of the details about what's going on with the houses in the Westerlands until we get over there with Cersei. And even then, because this is Cersei being Cersei, we will have to read between the lines, because she thinks that she's some great, insightful strategist, and she very much isn't. We will need to read through the lines to try and figure out what's really going on, not just what she thinks is going on. Username redacted. What is the extent of the damage to the Riverlords and Robb's war within the Westerlands? How much did the Riverlords do to combat the Lannisters offensively? So how much damage did the Riverlords do to combat or how much did the Riverlords do to combat the Lannisters offensively? So the Riverlords, if you're talking about when Robb went off into the Westerlands, they did quite a bit of damage. Actually, they stole a load of gold. They destroyed, the Lannisters were building a new army. They destroyed that. They ravaged a few farms. They did. I mean, it's not like when the Mountain was heading across the Riverlands, but yes, they did cause quite a bit of damage over there. Does this prevent the Lannisters from doing things? Well, it certainly slowed them down in terms of getting new armies into the field. But this is the point at which Tywin's saying, you don't win everything on the battlefield. You win some wars with a quill and ink. Reflective Rambling saying, fine, just have to go off topic. Kirsty Angel has a question. Who's described as the most beautiful man in all of Westeros' history? I mean, I don't know if they have a description of the most beautiful man. Um, oh, I shall throw that one to the chat if you want. So there are a lot of people who are described as being beautiful, men who are described as being beautiful. Jamie is very much along those lines. Um, Renly similarly is generally very well presented. Loris is definitely described as beautiful. Um, in terms of history going back, yeah, if there's anyone in the chat who knows if there's been somebody who's been described as the most beautiful man in the history of Westeros, then I would be fascinated to know. Let's Caius Ballerina, good guess, saying my guess is Rhaegar. Yeah, Rhaegar, basically most of the Lannisters are described as beautiful. Rhaegar in particular. Um Alfad saying, greetings, Robert. Apologies for off-topic question, but I'm enjoying your series of mysteries set up in the early part of A Song of Ice and Fire, like the Varys Selmy connection, who sent the cat's paw to kill Bran. Yeah, so that video came out just yesterday, who sent the cat's paw assassin to kill Bran. With a similar theme in mind, I want to ask the question, when Varys tells Ned about the plot to kill Robert during the melee, was he telling the truth, or was he also manipulating Ned like he did Sir Barristan? Okay, so this is a really, I think it's interesting. So you, with all the thinking about Robert Baratheon dying, um, we kind of forget about the fact that Varys, quite early on, after Ned had got there, basically said there was a plot to kill Robert Baratheon in the tourney, in the Hans tourney. He turns up in disguise, goes to Ned and tells him that, and Ned sort of says, "Well, who?" And Varys kind of responds with, like, "If you need me to tell you who's trying to kill Robert Baratheon, then maybe you're not the man I thought you were." So Ned kind of just assumes, okay, so it's the Lannisters. Now, what is this plot? Well, Varys basically says that Cersei forbade Robert Baratheon from entering the tourney, the melee. And she did this, Varys says, because she knows that that is the most likely way to get Robert Baratheon to enter. If he thinks that his wife has just forbidden him from doing it, there's no way he would just sort of allow that to stand. That would make him want, and he did try and um, enter. If not the melee, then the lists for the jousting. This is where the whole breastplate stretcher fun comes in, and Ned basically persuades him not to. But Varys tells him if he had been in the melee, then probably somebody would have killed him. These things happen in melees. It would have been a stray blow from a Lannister loyalist, and it would have been very hard to say exactly who did it. But if Cersei then immediately goes over and shows great mercy, then it would be very hard for that. I know you didn't mean to. You're such a brave knight. You mustn't, you mustn't beat yourself up about it. That kind of thing. Then the knight would probably be able to get off and then be subtly rewarded later. So that was the idea. There are plenty of people. That Mountain was around at that time. The Hound was there. There are lots of people who could have done it. Um, so was this actually a plot, or was Varys manipulating Ned in some way? Well, Varys was obviously manipulating Ned in some way. What we find with Varys, and we see this when Tyrion comes in as a new Hand of the King, is that he immediately tries to prove his worth to the new Hand of the King, giving them information, telling them things, because Varys is self-aware enough to know that he's not got the greatest reputations, and if a new person comes in, they will be immediately suspicious of Varys. So Varys proactively tries to get on the right side of these new hands of the king as they come in. So that's one element of what's going on here. Was he right? Was there a plot? Well, I think it's probably fair to say that there being a Lannister plot to kill the king, Cersei's plan for when Robert did get killed on that boar hunt, and it wasn't a particularly uh, a nuanced plan. There wasn't great amounts of finesse there. Basically, she said to Lancel Lannister, just don't give him the normal wine, give him particularly strong wine, and let's hope that he goes hunting, faces something that he can't defeat, and because he's so very drunk, and he'll die like that. That's not a massive plot. Um, it's just it could very easily look like an accident because it was an accident. He drank too much. He faced down a boar when he shouldn't. He got hurt with a boar. So that is and I rarely kind of praise Cersei for her thinking, but in this, it does actually kind of make sense. She didn't have a detailed plot. I'm going to kill him here at this point at that time. She just created opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. He could die here like that, and it would look like an accident. If he doesn't there, there'll be another thing. If he hadn't died on that hunt, then something else could have happened. There'll be another thing along a few days later, and each of them would have looked like some kind of accident or something like that. She knew what he was like, and she could use that to manipulate, and eventually he would be killed. But it wasn't like hiring the faceless men to come and assassinate him. So I hope that kind of makes sense. I think, yes, he was telling the truth. I think he played it up a bit to try and gain Ned's trust, but I don't think he was lying. Put it that way. Just having a quick flick through. Daemon Blackfire, people are talking about this is the most beautiful man. Uh, Prince Baelor, people are suggesting. Oberyn, that might just be a Pedro Pascal thing there. So yeah, there's not. I don't. As I say, I don't think that there is a character that was held up as being the most beautiful man in the history of Westeros, but there are lots who are definitely considered like that. Okay, I've got one more question, which is actually to do with the Rings of Power, which I shall very quickly answer because we had quite a big reveal yesterday, which is this is over on the Lord of the Rings side of the house, obviously, that Tom Bombadil will be appearing in season 2 of The Rings of Power. And George R.R. Tolkien was wondering what my thoughts on that are. Mixed, it has to be said. I love Tom Bombadil as a character. I'm really on one level, I'm really excited to see him on the screen because we haven't seen him on the screen before. He was cut from the Peter Jackson films, understandably so, but it still feels like a shame not to have seen him. The actor playing him is Rory Kinnear, who is an excellent actor. So I'm feeling reassured by that. To balance it, the 4 photos we've seen, he doesn't look like a very merry fellow as he comes across in the books, as he introduces himself as a merry fellow. He's got sort of concerned looks on his face, so I'm not 100% sure whether they will be capturing the kind of the feel of him, and also the showrunners have up front in that article. It was a Vanity Fair interview. Said that they have changed his character. They say 5 or 10% to make him. Tom Bombadil is very much just about existing, living in the moment, not getting engaged with worldly matters and affairs. And they've said they've tweaked that a little bit, so he does a little bit get involved. For me, I don't think you can. The whole point is that Tolkien created him as a sort of a comment about being free from those kinds of cares. So I think if you change that, you change the fundamental nature of the character. But I'm not, as you know, I'm not one of those people who's going to be. First of all, I will give it a chance. I'm not going to prejudge it, but also. This is the Rings of Power is very much inspired by Tolkien rather than an attempt at a 100% faithful adaptation, and I think that's the feel that we should probably take into looking at it. Let's have a quick flick through the chat. Fracture Rounding saying, touch disappointed with Rory Kinnear is an amazing actor will have so little plot relevance. I think the idea is that they are going to give him some plot relevance, and that's the changing character will be the fact that he is becoming something that was not Tolkien's concept of that character. Carl Parsnark saying, isn't Marjorie's brother a hottie? Loras is indeed, as you say, a hottie. Effective Rambling saying, I had a guest spot on Fellowship of Fans stream on this. I did, and then the same computer problem that I've had today happened yesterday, and I couldn't get back onto the stream. So if by all means go and have a look at the stream because Fellowship of Fans is wonderful. But if you're going there looking for me, then I will. I'm there for 5 minutes, is what I'm saying. Andrew Kay saying, Westerlands seems especially strict and austere. Why do you suppose this is? Certainly not for lack of wealth and resources. It's not always. So Tywin's father certainly didn't seem strict and austere. The large parts of it are mountainous and hilly, which perhaps sort of create this kind of more austere feel, and parts of it are facing out to the ocean, to where the Iron Islanders may well be coming. So it's really the sort of the bit in the middle that it's perhaps has the greater opportunity, and certainly you will find Fair Isle, Rhaena seemed to have found peace there. She seemed to find that a nice place to be. Certainly, if you go into Casterly Rock, yes, it's a big rock on the outside, but inside, I'm really looking forward to seeing it when we do get to see it. But inside, the way that people like Jamie remember it, it's full of treasures. So, yes, sort of strict and austere on the outside, but inside, perhaps less so. Chris PH saying Loras was a hottie after the storming of Dragonstone. Too soon. Then having a quick flick through. Reapy Cheap the Mouse, April, May. I'm not entirely sure what that's in connection with, but yeah, the Narnia films. I think they're films rather than TV shows. Netflix ones are starting to take shape. They're still a long way away from casting or anything like that, but that is definitely something that's going to be happening soon. Okay, I think with that, I will start drawing this one to a small close. Thank you so much to the patrons, first of all. and also moderators. You've done a fantastic job today. Hugely appreciated. But what I think next week, let's do a Lord of the Rings one next week. It's been a few weeks since we've done a Lord of the Rings one, and then we'll come back and we're now only 2 or 3 weeks away from House of the Dragon. So you will find that we're starting to gear up a little bit towards that. So these Thursday live streams will be carrying on. But I'm back. The day before, the Sunday, the episodes will be coming out overnight for me on this side of the Atlantic anyway, overnight Sunday into Monday of House of the Dragon. On this Sunday evening at 10 p.m, I will be doing a pre-show live stream for a couple of hours before every episode, so we can get a chance to talk through the episodes specifically there as well. So those things are going to be happening here on this channel, and obviously on the main channel, I'll be doing House of the Dragon episode breakdowns and other deep dives into the lore. But if you have come all the way through to the end of this, thank you so much. It's been fantastic having you here with me. If you're watching back a little bit later on YouTube, there somewhere around here is a link to my other videos, a playlist of other live streams I've done. Appearing somewhere around here is a link to my Patreon page. Patreon is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. But that is all for this time. I will be back same time next week. Thanks, everyone. I shall see you again soon.